and then you repeat that, and then...
My name is Helen Louise Peterson Hustad. I was born in Spring Grove, Minnesota. Although my folks lived in Decorah at the time, my dad coached football and basketball at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. The first house we lived in on campus was not a dorm. It had been the president's house, so it was a two-story house with an attic. But we did have athletes living in the attic, I remember. And so maybe one of the only ways they could be at the college and play on my dad's athletic teams was to stay in our house, right? Well, it was the 1930s, and nobody had any money, nobody. We were able to subsist very nicely because even though my dad didn't get a salary part of that time, so there was no money, maybe a few coins in a sugar bowl somewhere, but we had relatives that lived on farms, and so we could get meat products from them and eggs. The college was only men at that time. Remember, it was in 1936 when the college became coeducational, but we were still living in Campus House when this particular story happened, and so I must have been about 5. And I remember my dad telling me that if I were a good girl, I could plan to go to St. Olaf because that was the college where women were admitted at that time, but Luther hadn't been. But he said, if you're not so good, we'll have to send you to Upper Iowa. And that's a college that he had not a whole lot of respect for, or he thought of as being lesser, I guess, than our Lutheran colleges. And so I remembered that. And when college became coeducational in 1936, I remember thinking, oh, well, I can go to Luther. I don't have to think about going to St. Olaf or Upper Iowa. Yeah. Well, of course, now we have like 4 St. Olaf people in our family. I'm very proud of the St. Olaf people, but that's, and I married a St. Olaf person, but that's how it is. And, what else do I remember? Well, I remember buying a piano, my first piano in that house, and it came in, and I could plink around on it, and had to start taking lessons right away and practicing every day. So I associate the piano with Campus House.
That was a good one.
That was, yeah.
We could go on tour.
We
could.
Okay, 286.
286.
Yeah, as long as we're only doing the post-communion.
Sure.
There we go. We're seasonal. We're seasonal.
Right side.
It was a kind of idyllic childhood because we had so many friends and the surroundings were lovely. Beautiful campus. It's just a lot of nature, and we could be out in the woods and hiking, and my parents never worried because there were always people around who knew who we were and what we were doing, I suppose. But so we had a ton of freedom. One of the influences of growing up with the college students is that seamlessly I expected to just grow up and become one of them, which I did. And I didn't even have to leave my bedroom because we lived so close to the campus. I just walked to school. Right out of the gate, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had no notion, so I took pretty much general classes. I did take music, I took harmony, and I was taking piano, and I was singing in the choir. And I took English. I was interested in theater because I had been in plays, and I was in probably a play every semester during college. I say I majored in extracurricular activities. And I was working on my English major, and then something prompted me to decide to try taking a class from my dad, who was the director and head of the athletic department in the physical education curriculum. So I took this class from him, and it was pretty neat, and I had already been involved in women's sports at the college, and so I had extra time, so I just went ahead and finished my Phi-Ed degree too. Did I tell you the story about the snow festival?
Why don't you tell us the story?
There was a snow festival a winter festival in Dubuque, Iowa, and they had requested that Decorah send somebody to become a part of the princess's court, because they always had this kind of ritual of a coronation ball and a snow queen and all that stuff. And because Decorah was one of the important cities in the region, we were invited to send somebody. And there was no Miss Decorah contest in Decorah at the time, and so the Chamber of Commerce president called and asked if I would do that. I said, "Oh, sure, I'll go to the snow festival." Well, it was very interesting. The star of the festival was a ski jumper from Norway. His name was Helen Hustad, and I remember having a little visit with him. And I remember that I got my wardrobe together. My mother had made me a beautiful dress to wear to the ball. And after I got back, one of the things that we had submitted to the festival was a photograph of me in a black bathing suit in the snow. Well, because I worked as a lifeguard, I wore a bathing suit all the time. I thought of that as like a uniform. But anyway, this picture of me in a black bathing suit in the snow appeared in the local newspaper, along with a schedule of the events. So when I got back, the college president asked me to come into the office to speak to him. And he said, I see you were involved in the snow festival in Dubuque. And I said, yes, I went as a representative of Decorah. And he said, yes, the schedule was printed in the paper, and it said something about a ball. Yes, I said, there was a coronation ball when they crowned the queen. And he said, was there dancing at that ball? I said, yes. And he said, did you participate? And I said, well, yes, of course. I was a representative of the city. I participated in the events. And he said, what would your parents think? And I said, my dad wishes that his boys in the basketball team could dance because it would improve their footwork a lot. During my senior year, my friends from Minneapolis, Charlene, and another gal that had graduated from Luther a year or so advanced, had rounded up a tour called American Youth Abroad. And it was for college students or graduates to tour Europe. And it was to be 88 days in Europe for really just a little over $1,000. And it included transportation, which was like 8 or 9 days on the ship. We went over in a converted British warship that was practically round, like a tub, and it took 8 or 9 days to cross. But it was a student ship, so we just had a party for 8 or 9 days. But so anyway, they said, we found this tour to go to Europe. And I thought, well, I've been saving my money to go to Europe. I will do it. But in order to be able to pay back my aunt the rest of the money that I had to pay, it was important for me to sign a teaching contract. So I thought, well, I'll just defer my other plans for a year and I'll go out and teach for a year. And I did that. I signed a teaching contract and off I went to Europe on this 88-day trip through 14 countries. I started teaching in Brainerd, Minnesota in 1952 in the fall. I was teaching senior high girls physical education. I remember one incident and talking about sex education. And there was a girl in the audience that I knew had had a baby. And I thought, boy, I don't need to be talking about this. Because I was green as green. I had no hint about what I was saying. I had enjoyed teaching girls physical education because I felt that I was teaching them independence skills as much as anything. And I enjoyed that. I did after I was married and the children were born, I did a lot of substitute teaching. And my New World Symphony experience was in Minneapolis after we moved back there in the early 70s. When I was young and I would be out in the hills around Decorah, I would think about the Indians riding around on their horses because we lived in Indian territory, Winneshiek County and on the Oneota River, and all of our references were Native American. And I thought a couple of times I would be out by myself in the hills and I would look over at a hill and I would think about the Native Americans riding on their horses down this hillside, and I would hear in my head the New World Symphony by Dvorak, who incidentally lived many years very near Decorah with relatives in Spillville, Iowa. So I would kind of automatically raise my hand and conduct the New World Symphony, and I dreamed about being a conductor. Many years later, of course, I was teaching elementary school music as a substitute. One morning I had an early morning call, and I remember it was about 8:30 in the winter in Minnesota, and I had this 4th grade class, and they were all tired. It was about 8:30 in the morning, and their eyes were sort of running, and their noses were running, and it was the middle school band. And I got up to the podium to open the music, and here was the New World Symphony. And I couldn't keep a straight face. It was so funny. It was the middle section. Da-dee-dee-dee-da-dum, la-da-da-da-da. And I just howled. I couldn't keep a straight face. I was trying to get this middle school band with running eyes and runny noses to play this piece of music that had been so important to me at one time. In the fall of 1959, I had just turned 29, and that's when I met my husband, Jack. I was at the church in the afternoon. I lived far from the campus, and I lived far from my school, and so sometimes when it was an evening of choir practice, I would go over to the church and either study or do errands or whatever. And I happened to be there. My car was parked in the parking lot, and Jack, who had just been hired as the new associate pastor, came in for a kind of a walkthrough, and my car was right out the window, and it was a white Thunderbird. And another white Thunderbird came and parked right next to it And Jack got out to come in, and as David Preuss was looking out the window of his office, David said, "Oh no." And so he could kind of foretell that at least something might happen. And because as I had a certain amount of life experience, it didn't take very long. He was attractive, and we shared many of the same goals. We enjoyed the same kinds of things, and we started dating, and it developed into a relationship and love, and we were married that summer, 1960. Well, of course, I never would have expected to marry a pastor. That's just beyond belief. But he was different. You know, he wasn't stuffy. He wasn't closed-minded about things. He was very open, and he had a good sense of humor. And I don't think I ever expected to be the wife of a parish pastor. That was not what he was academically oriented. In the summer of that year, 1961, we left to go to Scotland for a year, where Jack was going to pursue a doctorate in church history, and with the idea of becoming a professor. And I just thought that would be my life. It would be like growing up on a college campus, and I would just be a part of that academic environment. In the spring of the year, I thought we were midway through this doctoral program, and Jack got a phone call. And it was from the home mission office, and Otto Hessel, I remember his name, said, "I want you to come back and start a new congregation. You're just the person we need for this." And I said, "Oh no, that isn't what we were planning to do." And Jack said, "Well, I've made a commitment, and this is a call." About a week later, a friend of his who lived in Geneva called and said, "Jack, our church in Geneva needs a pastor. Can you come there?" And Jack said, "No, I've taken a call." And I said, "Jack, you just call them. They haven't even gotten your response letter yet. Just call them and say, 'Don't open the letter, we're not coming.'" And Jack said, "No, I've made a commitment." So we went back to Kansas. In 1960, we were still working with the church, but at that time he was going around raising money for a program that the church had to start new churches, and he had been traveling all over the country. And I had made a couple, 3 trips to Russia during that period. One of the things that impresses you about this is how similar we are all around the world, even though our circumstances are very different and it might look different. We all have the same kind of ideals, and of course it's easy if you share a church background. If you're a believer, it's been a roller coaster ride. We've lived in 12 different countries. We have served a number of very interesting congregations. We have made relationships with thousands of people, and we've traveled all over the world. There hasn't been much time for reflection, I guess. I know you kids all think that I should write memoirs, but I haven't had time for that.
Pretty good, huh?